Yes. Thank you again, the fourth estate. You came in your numbers. We are always happy to welcome you at ZANU PF headquarters, the home of the permanent Zimbabwe revolution. Today, our presser is focused on two main subjects. The first one is the aftermath of the fiasco of 31 March and the refocus of the President, Dr. Emmerson Mnangagwa, Comrade. And he's refocusing on what he has always done best since the advent of the Second Republic. And the kudos for the President have been much more to do with the economic recovery and sustained development
Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
So today we're really plunging into just one source, but it's a fascinating one you've brought along.
Yes, it's a transcript from a press conference, ZANU PF headquarters, dated May 27, 2025.
And the speaker is Comrade Ambassador Christopher Changa.
That's the one.
Okay, so our mission here really is to unpack the specific claims, the particular narrative that this document, this transcript, presents.
Exactly. Focusing on what it says about, well, Zimbabwe's economy, the political scene, international ties, all through the lens of this specific text.
And we should stress right up front, this isn't about judging if the claims are, true or accurate.
No, not at all. It's about understanding what's being said here from this viewpoint. We're kind of guides through this one text.
Got it. So the speaker, Changa, he kicks off by referencing some recent events.
He does. He mentions what he terms the fiasco of 31 March and says the president has refocused things in response.
Okay. And right away, he sets up this really powerful contrast, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He claims the situation has just been completely transformed, like night and day compared to 5 years ago.
That difference seems key. So what picture does the source paint of 5 years ago? What were the challenges, according to this transcript?
Well, it sounds pretty grim based on his description. Long queues for fuel.
I remember seeing reports like that.
Right, and he specifically mentions the country relying on a begging bowl, was the phrase used, for food aid.
Begging bowl from international partners.
Yes, particularly the West, he notes, and UN agencies playing a big role in feeding people, especially during droughts.
He also mentions the currency, doesn't he? Something about it being worthless.
Yeah, a worthless currency back then, and this general feeling, according to him, of no hope.
Especially among young people, he implies.
Exactly. And he even suggests that the revolution, the one fought in the 60s and 70s, was looking like a lost cause at that point in time. That's the picture from 5 years ago, according to this source.
Wow, okay. But then the narrative shifts dramatically.
Dramatically. He uses this quite vivid analogy, the difference between midnight in the rain season and afternoon in October when the sun is very bright.
That's quite the image to describe the change he's claiming.
It really is.
So, okay, what specifics does the source offer then? What's the evidence presented in this transcript for this transformation, this current vibrancy he talks about?
Well, one of the kind of concrete things he highlights is the number of cars.
Cars?
Yeah, imports, people driving them. He notes there isn't really a developed public transport system, so people are buying vehicles, lots of them.
Okay.
And according to his account, there are now so many cars that the roads are actually clogged.
Clogged roads is a sign of economic success.
That's how it's framed here. He even links the high accident rate to this volume of traffic exceeding the road capacity. It's presented as a consequence of economic activity.
That's a fascinating connection the source is making. Congestion and accidents framed as, well, signs of prosperity.
It is, and the transcript interprets this increase in cars, this ownership level, as, and I quote loosely here, the arrival of a middle-class Zimbabwean society.
A new middle class.
Explicitly. The speaker claims this shows the economy is now pumping on a self-sustaining role.
Self-sustained.
And this new middle class, according to the source, owns everything outright. Houses, cars, no hire purchase, no mortgages needed for this activity. That's the specific claim.
Right, so outright ownership is the marker.
Yeah.
That's a very particular picture of wealth being painted in this narrative.
Precisely. He also emphasizes what he calls the vibrant theme economy, claiming it contributes up to 70% of the national GDP. He calls it the pulse of economic performance.
70% is a huge number.
It is. And, contrasting with that hopelessness he described earlier,
Right.
He now claims formal employment is becoming the norm again. He points to emerging and reviving towns as proof the economy is on the mend.
And this is where the source makes a pretty significant claim about outside observers, right?
Yes, a very big claim. He says even institutions that had supposedly consigned Zimbabwe to the heap of failed states
Strong words.
are now acknowledging these positive changes he's described.
Does he name them?
He specifically states that the IMF and the World Bank are now concurring to the bullish figures of Zimbabwe's economic recovery.
Okay, so within the world of this transcript, that's presented as major validation.
Huge validation.
And a credit for all this claimed progress. Where does the source place that?
Primarily with the president. It's attributed to his focus, his leadership, his performance. This whole quest for prosperity is framed as being driven by him.
Okay. Let's shift gears a bit to the political side presented in this source. He mentions that fiasco of 31 March again, and Raw's matters, I think, and something about bogus spokespersons online.
Yes, he does bring those up.
So what's the takeaway from this document about those events and the sort of broader political picture being painted?
Well, according to the speaker, the main point is that despite any feeling that something big ominous was about to happen, it all just came to naught, fizzled out.
And why does he say it fizzled out?
He attributes it directly to the claim that the people of Zimbabwe are essentially happy with what the president is doing.
So the public's reaction or lack of reaction is presented as proof of support.
Oh.
Proof of underlying stability.
Exactly. The speaker describes the population as very risky, having fought a war.
Meaning they know the cost of instability.
That seems to be the implication, that they're unwilling to be stampeded into doing something which destroys the gains and the peace and the stability and the unity that the source claims now exist.
So they dismissed the attempts to stir things up.
He says they gave short shift, basically. Dismiss anyone aspiring for power through chaos, through confusion. That's the narrative here.
And what does this claimed popular support mean for the president's position, according to this specific viewpoint?
The narrative is one of, well, absolute confidence. Unshakable confidence. The speaker claims the president struts upon the economic stage, the political stage, the diplomatic stage, with absolute confidence, with absolute health, with absolute assurance that he is on course. He's presented as being completely in communion with the Zimbabwe people.
A very strong assertion about his current standing.
Extremely strong. The transcript explicitly states that the president's power, both within the party and his grip on the state of affairs of Zimbabwe, has never been so strong.
Never been stronger.
That's the claim. The speaker argues that the ghost of confusion of despondence from that March 31st event has been foisted aside by the reality that the president is doing a good job.
And how does the source frame critics, those who maybe don't buy this economic picture?
Well, they're dismissed pretty strongly. The source frames critics talking about a fiction of the economy as having no statistics to back up their claims.
So no data, just rhetoric.
Essentially. And resorting instead to ad hominem attacks is the phrase used, like personalized attacks, maybe even about physical appearance, he suggests.
And their motivation, according to this source?
According to this particular viewpoint, it's reckless, unfulfilled ambition for power. Ambition they supposedly can't achieve democratically.
Why not?
Because, as the speaker claims, the voter is basically happy with the president and the direction the source argues the country is taking.
Okay, got it. Let's turn now to the international relations angle. The source highlights a specific recent visit, doesn't it?
It does. A high-level visit by the president to Russia, described in the source as Zimbabwe's traditional all-weather friend.
All-weather friend. And the speaker adds quite a bit of historical context to that relationship.
Yes, quite a deep historical dive, actually. He links Russia back to what he calls the democratization of the gun, starting with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917.
Democratization of the gun. How does he connect that?
Well, the framing in the source is that this historical event ultimately enabled people of color, including, later African liberation movements in southern Africa, to fight for independence because they could master modern weapons.
I see the connection he's drawing.
And he specifically mentions young Zimbabweans training in friendly countries like Russia back in the 60s and 70s. That's the historical root he emphasizes.
So that's the foundation laid out in the source, but the current focus is different.
Exactly. The speaker says quite clearly, now it's about economic cooperation.
Economic cooperation with Russia.
Yes. He notes Russia is a country that, despite facing sanctions, has proven it can support its economy even during a war. That resilience is highlighted.
And is this potential cooperation linked to anything specific Zimbabwe possesses?
Yes, resources. The source highlights Zimbabwe being apparently the fourth largest diamond producer globally.
Fourth largest, okay.
And Russia, he notes, has the biggest diamond mining company. So the implication is clear. The speaker states Zimbabwe's minerals are open for business from Russia.
Open for business. Any other countries mentioned?
Belarus gets a brief mention too, in the same sort of context of international economic engagement.
Okay. And finally, wrapping things up thematically, this document draws a really strong kind of overarching connection, doesn't it, between today's economic goals and the nation's history.
Absolutely. This is a core part of the narrative the source is building.
How does it frame that?
Well, the speaker argues that the president's current focus, economic recovery, prosperity, is presented as the only way to fulfill the sacrifices of that generation from the 1960s and 70s.
So connecting present economic policy directly to the liberation struggle.
Very directly. He frames the president as being intimately connected to that history, to those ideals.
How so?
He's described as a surviving pioneer recruit who personally went through that journey of developing state and military capacity. Someone with institutional memory that's pregnant, his word with the idealism that drove people to sacrifice their lives.
So the idea being presented is that those past sacrifices weren't just for political freedom, but had a vision of future prosperity embedded within them.
Yes, that's exactly the claim in the source. That generation knew that if we fight for our country, we shall prosper.
And the president is positioned as fulfilling that promise now.
Precisely. He's presented as living to fulfill that aspect of prosperity as a homage to the sacrifices he directly participated in and, according to the source, continues to champion. It really anchors the economic narrative right back into the liberation struggle story.
Okay, so let's recap then. What have we really unpacked in this deep dive, looking solely at this one source, the May 27th ZANU PF press conference?
Well, we've definitely explored the narrative it presents. A narrative claiming this dramatic economic transformation, right? From a past depicted with fuel queues, aid dependency.
The begging bowl.
Right. To a present described with terms like vibrancy, a new middle class marked by outright ownership.
And even claimed acknowledgement from the IMF and World Bank, according to the source.
Exactly. And we've also seen how the source frames recent political events, like that March 31st fiasco, as failed attempts to disrupt stability.
Attributing the failure to popular support for the president, claiming he has an unprecedented grip on power and a strong connection with the people.
Yes. And then there's the international relations piece.
Primarily focused on Russia, highlighting that historical connection, but emphasizing the current focus on economic cooperation, particularly around minerals.
And it's crucial, as you said earlier, to remember our focus here has been strictly on outlining the specific claims and the particular perspective laid out within this single document.
Absolutely. Just understanding what this source is saying.
Okay, so as you, the listener, think about everything we've discussed today, all drawn from the perspective of this one press conference transcript. Here's maybe a final thought, rooted directly in that source material.
The speaker, Changa, very strongly links the claimed current economic progress directly to fulfilling the ideals and sacrifices of the 1960s and 70s generation. He presents the president not just as leading the country now, but as a key participant and ongoing champion of that historical legacy.
So, thinking about it from this source's viewpoint, how does tying today's economic goals so tightly to those historical revolutionary ideals actually shape the narrative of progress and national stability that they're trying to put across?
And what might that perspective, as presented in this document, suggest about the nature of the support base and the political environment that the speaker is describing?
Yeah, just something to mull over based purely on what we've heard from this specific source today.